So again, my name is Mia Stevens, and I'm a member of the JUMP academic team. And today's webinar is JUMP Basics for Professors and Students. So this is designed for any academic who is brand new to JUMP and is just getting started, and will cover basic navigation and basic functionality in JUMP. So we'll start with a welcome tour to give you a high-level overview of what JUMP is all about and the basic structure and setup of JUMP. We'll see tools for summarizing and graphing data in JUMP. In fact, this is where we'll spend the bulk of the time. I'll provide an overview of tools for data analysis, but I won't dig in deeply into these topics. There are other webinars that'll go much further. I'll just point out where these tools are available. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about how to get data into JUMP and how to save your work. And we'll also see a lot of resources for learning JUMP and getting help directly within JUMP. I'm using a journal for this webinar, and a journal is just a file within JUMP that allows you to organize notes and links to data sets or websites or other information. I'm using a Mac for this webinar, but note that JUMP runs natively as well on a Windows machine. So this is what JUMP looks like on a Windows machine. So where there are a couple of little differences, I'll toggle over to Windows and show you what those differences are. But for the most part, the basic functionality in JUMP is the same whether you're on Windows or Mac. So let's get started with our little tour. And this should answer the question, what is JUMP all about? So think of this as your quick 5-minute tour. So I'm going to click on this link, what is JUMP? And JUMP does have a programming language, but you don't need to know how to write code in order to use JUMP. So what I'm going to do is just generate a little bit of output so you can get a high-level view of what JUMP is all about and the native structure of JUMP. So what I've done is I've opened up a data set, and this is data from the sample data directory under the Help menu. So with JUMP in the sample data library, or organized in an outline sort of mode in the sample data directory itself, is a number of data sets, somewhere around 500 data sets, and along with different scripts for teaching and learning JUMP. So these data, this is called SAT by year, and this is test score data for the United States over an 8-year period. And I've just launched a little bit of output from this data set. So the first piece of output, and we'll come back and revisit all of this in a few minutes, is from the first option under Analyze. And we group our analyses under the Analyze menu, starting with univariate graphs and statistics, bivariate graphs and statistics, and as we scroll down the list, the methods get much more comprehensive and complex. So fit model is for linear models where we have multiple x's or multiple y's, and JUMP also provides a number of more advanced features. For this webinar, we'll mostly stick to some of the basic platforms. So a little bit about all of our output. If you've never seen JUMP before, everything in JUMP is dynamic. So if I click and drag, I can highlight values in a graph. And notice that the corresponding values are highlighted in every other graph that's open, and they're also highlighted back in the data table. So all graphs are linked to all other graphs and back to the data table. If you don't like the look or feel of JUMP, there are options to customize the look and feel of JUMP. Within any analysis, for example, if I click on this little red triangle, we hide options under the red triangles to keep the output clean. If I select the stack option, I can convert our histograms and our output to a horizontal look rather than the vertical look. For each individual variable here that I'm analyzing, there are also red triangles. And the red triangles are context-sensitive menus that provide additional information, and the additional options that are provided make sense for the type of variables or the type of analysis we've requested. So if we look at the data, SAT verbal is test scores, so this is continuous data or numeric data, and if I click on the red triangle, we see options that make sense for one continuous variable or one numeric variable. So for example, test mean is a one sample t-test. We can ask for confidence intervals. So we provide a pretty flat initial output with some default options turned on, but if you click on the red triangle, you get additional options. And also, if you right-click anywhere in the output, you get additional options that make sense for wherever you happen to right-click. For region is categorical data, so we see a bar chart and frequency distribution, and again, different options under the red triangle. Now a little bit more about all of our output. All of the axes are dynamic, so if I click and drag, I can shift the axis to one direction or another. Or if I move my mouse to the end of an axis, I can dynamically rescale or rebend the axis. And there are a number of tools across the top that we'll talk about, for example, a grabber, that allow you to directly interact with any graph or any analysis. And I'll put this back on the cursor tool. All graphs are dynamically resizable by moving your mouse to the bottom corner of the dataset or the bottom corner of the graph. And these little gray icons allow us to tuck away or display parts of our output that we may or may not be interested in looking at. Every table of output is also dynamic, so if I right-click in any table, I can ask for additional statistics if they exist, or sort or make into a data table, or change the look and the feel of the table. So all of the output in JMP is customizable and dynamic. So this is output from the distribution platform. Well, if I'm fundamentally interested in graphics, I'll select an option under the graph menu. And all of our analyses in JMP, if we select an option from Analyze, you'll see a graph with the appropriate statistics. So the premise is a graph for every statistic. If you're fundamentally interested in graphics, dynamic interactive graphics, we'll select an option under the graph menu. And here, just to get us started, I'll show the graph builder. So the graph builder is a dynamic platform for dragging and dropping variables. So if I click Start Over and simply select variables and drag and drop, we see the JMP produces a graph. And the graph is smart enough to know that SAT Verbal and SAT Math contain continuous or numeric data, so it makes sense to plot those variables against one another. And it's put region up here in this overlay, so that the observations of the states are grouped by region. So there are a number of different zones here for dragging and dropping. And we'll take a closer look at this as we go along. And finally, as part of our quick tour, if you've got data with multiple dimensions, as we do here, so we've got a number of states, a number of years, they're grouped into region, and we've got a number of continuous variables, we can plot the data using a bubble plot. And a bubble plot is an option under the graph menu. So this allows us to see changes over time. And it also allows us, because we have a hierarchy, to split the data out. So if I click on one of the bubbles and click the split button, we can see the data that are grouped into that particular region. And all of this was driven from a data table. So a little bit more about our data tables. Data tables consist of columns and rows, and the assumption is that within a column we have the same type of information. The icons on the side tell us a little bit about our data. So we've got three panels on the side. We've got a table panel, and the table panel allows us to save notes. So here, if I double click on this note, it'll tell us why the points are colored. The reference, this is where the data came from. And these icons are these options with the little green triangles. These are actually saved scripts. So if you're interested in writing code or would like to save your work out, you can easily save the script to a data table or save it to a file to save with others. The middle panel, the columns panel, tells us about the variables in our data set. So we've got 19 columns. One column is selected. Where you see the little red icon, this tells us the modeling type, and the modeling type is how JMP is going to treat the variable in an analysis. If I right-click right on top of this icon, I can see that there are 4 different modeling types. Continuous, which is numeric data where calculating an average makes sense, or having a decimal place makes sense. Ordinal is ordered categories, and nominal is simply unordered categories or labels. And there can also be a none for variables that we don't plan on using in any analysis. So let's look a little bit about our data tables. So a little bit more about basic navigation in JMP. Again, data are grouped in columns and rows, and you see for columns and rows that there are red icons. So everywhere in JMP you'll see these little red hotspots, and the red hotspots give you additional options based on wherever the hotspot falls. So here I'm clicking on the red triangle for rows, and I see additional options related to rows. If I click on the top red triangle, I get additional options related to columns. And I see the same on the side. So if I click on the red triangle next to columns, I see additional options. And the same for rows. So this data set has 19 columns, 408 rows, And because I selected some observations in a histogram, 72 of those rows are selected. To deselect columns and rows, there's a little divider in the top corner of the data table. And if I click right below this divider, this diagonal, I can deselect my rows. And if I click right above the diagonal, I deselect the columns. You can also use the control key. So if I select a column like state and I want to deselect state, clicking again while holding down the control key will deselect this column. And the same feature works in any graph or any analysis. The little gray icons, I mentioned these earlier, allow you to tuck away parts of your output that you're not interested in looking at. So here, if I'm not interested in looking at the column or table or rows panel, I simply want to see the data grid, I could tuck away the data grid. And then clicking on the gray triangle again returns that grid. All right, what else do we want to talk about? Well, when we first opened up JMP, there are a few windows that open up by default. And let's quickly walk through these windows. One of the windows is called the tip of the day window. And the tip of the day window now has 58 tips for navigating and working in JMP. And these are randomly displayed. So for example, how do I automatically save open windows? And as I scroll through these, you'll see that these are common tips for navigating and working within JMP. How do I do several things at a time? How do I broadcast commands from one graph to another so that I don't have to repeat the same command several times? How do I paste column names? So many of the things that we're going to walk through today are covered in the tips of the day. And I'd recommend once you get started with JMP, take a few moments to walk through these, and you'll see a lot of nice little shortcuts for working within JMP. Another window that opens is called the JMP Starter. And you can also access the JMP Starter from the window menu if you're on a Mac. And the JMP Starter window gives you the ability to quickly navigate through the menus in JMP and see what's available under each menu. And some users prefer to use this as their navigation panel. So for example, if I click on Basic, we'll see the basic types of analyses that are available with some text describing each of those analyses. We'll see what's available from Fit Model, Predictive Modeling, and notice that there's a little icon that appears. There are two different versions of JMP. There's JMP and there's JMP Pro. And we'll talk a little bit more about the family of products in a moment. JMP Pro is essentially JMP with additional tools and advanced functionality for predictive modeling. So generalized regression is only available in JMP Pro. There's some advanced mixed models that are only available in JMP Pro. Some partially squares functionality. And as we scroll down the list, you'll see for some of the advanced functionality, a lot of these features are only available in JMP Pro. If you are curious about the differences between JMP and JMP Pro, and many academic licenses include JMP Pro automatically, there's a JMP Pro button at the bottom. And I'm using JMP Pro 13 for this demo. Most of what I'm going to talk about is built directly into JMP, but there are some additional features in JMP Pro that we will touch base on. So this JMP Pro menu tells you what's available only in JMP Pro, and then some features that are JMP Pro that are built into other menus. So the JMP Starter is a nice way of navigating to see what particularly is available from each of the menu items within JMP. Now there's also a home window, and the home window gives you a panel to allow you to navigate through your open windows. So for example, I've opened the SAT by year data and JMP Basics for professors and students, so these are my two recent files. And then under Windows, this allows me to quickly navigate back and forth between my open files and my open analyses. If you're using JMP on a Windows machine, the home window launches by default, and if you close the home window, it automatically closes JMP. But it gives you the same navigation ability. Now let me take a step back for a moment, and I'm going to close the home window. And let's talk a little bit about JMP. So JMP is actually a family of products. I'm using JMP Pro 13 for this webinar. There's also JMP Clinical for clinical trials, JMP Genomics for doing genetic research. For high schools and community colleges, there's a student edition, which is a scaled back version, and these are direct links to find additional information. And most academic sites or campuses have access to what we call the Academic Suite. And the Academic Suite is JMP 13 and JMP Pro 13 for both Mac and Windows. And it also includes an e-learning course. So how do you get JMP? If you don't have a copy of JMP or you're working off of a trial, if you're a student or a researcher or faculty member at a school or university, you may already have access to a campus-wide license. You can get a short-term license of JMP through onthehub.com/JMP. So this is a 6-month or 1-year license. The student edition is bundled with many textbooks for free, but the standard version is also bundled with many textbooks. And I'll make this journal available. There's 2 email addresses here. If you're interested in using JMP in the classroom, Chuck London can provide additional information. And Pawnee Allen can provide information if you're a researcher or you're interested in JMP genomics or JMP clinical, or you're interested in using JMP for institutional research. And all of the information on how to get JMP for academics or academic use is available at jmp.com/getjmp. Okay, so with that behind us, I actually want to skip ahead and go right down to resources for learning JMP. There are some really, really nice resources available under the Help menu. So the JMP Help is searchable help, and in JMP 13 we converted it to a browser-based version. Books is all of the documentation for JMP, so this is something like 4,000 pages of documentation. So if you have questions on algorithms or you're looking for examples, this is a really nice place to look. The sample data library I mentioned earlier has something like 500 data sets. So if I click on sample data library, you'll see that these are grouped into groupings by subject, and then there's a searchable list. If you are using a previous version of JMP or have used a previous version and are curious about the new features in JMP 13, these are listed under the New Features tab. You can also directly go to the JMP user community. So you'll find that there are a lot of resources for learning and using JMP that are posted on the user community, along with examples and a really nice discussion forum that's very active. So our community of JMP users is very active in answering questions and providing examples and also providing additional information. If you run into any problems using JMP, you'll see a link to contact technical support. And as I go through this, if you're interested in writing code, you'll see a scripting index. So this will, for example, give you information on how to integrate with R or with MATLAB. If you're curious about statistical features that are available in JMP, these are provided on the statistics index. And again, I'm going to be using data from the sample data library throughout this webinar. And I won't talk about all of these, but there are nice examples grouped by type of analysis and also by type of data. And for classroom use, we've grouped a lot of the really nice data sets and scripts under teaching resources. So for example, under examples for teaching, you'll see the names of data sets, and here's SAT by year, and the text defines some really nice ways that you can use these data sets in the classroom. If you're teaching an introductory statistics course, you'll see there are a lot of scripts for teaching statistical concepts. And we don't have time in this webinar to walk through these, but I want to point out that they're here, and they provide a really nice interface with JMP for exploring core statistical concepts. And the last thing we'll talk about before we go further is that you can easily customize the look and feel of JMP. So JMP has preferences, and we mentioned this within a graph that you can make changes and customize it. But if you want to change everything in JMP for every time you do a particular analysis, under JMP you can select preferences. And preferences allows you, for example, here I've turned on a purple laser pointer, to turn on a laser pointer, to change the way your graphs look, to change your styles, to change the platforms. So when I first got started, I showed the distribution platform. And if we always want to see a stacked or horizontal look, you can turn these options on and click Apply and then OK. And there are many other options that are available under the red triangles, and you may choose to turn these on. If you're on a Windows machine, you'll note that menus hide by default. So under File, Preferences, I want to point out that under Windows Specific, you can ask JMP to always hide menus and toolbars, and this is the default, or you can change it to never or based on window size. In fact, I think based on window size is the default. So if you're just getting started with JMP, I'd suggest changing this to never, and this will give you a menu on every window. All right. A little bit more on our resources. JMP.com/teach. We've made a lot of our different resources for using JMP available. So if I go back to my browser, all of our resources for using and learning JMP are available from JMP.com/teach. So this includes some getting started videos. All of our live academic webinars are listed here, so there'll be additional webinars for analyzing data and building models. And all of our recorded webinars are posted under the academic webinar library. If you have a specific question, for example, how do I do X in JMP? The learning library has short one-page guides and how-to videos. There's a nice case study library and a lot of other information for getting started with JMP. So let's talk about summarizing and graphing data. So I'm going to keep using this SAT by year data and highlight some of the nice features for summarizing data and also for producing interactive graphics. So I'll start with a tool under the columns menu called the columns viewer. And the columns viewer is a nice place to get started anytime you're first looking at data if you're interested in looking at numeric summaries of the data. So for example, if I click and drag and select all of the variables, or if I click and hold down the control key, I can select variables that are not contiguous. Or if I click and hold down the shift key, I can select all of the variables between the selected variables. So different ways of selecting variables. The options here are pretty simple. If I want to be able to show quartiles, in addition to the basic summary statistics, I'll select Show Quartiles, and then select Show Summary. I'll make this menu a little smaller so I can see everything. And all of my variables are currently selected, so I'm going to deselect by clicking this Clear Select button. And this gives me a high-level overview of all of the information in this data set. So I can see that I've got 51 states. I can see information for expenditure, student-faculty ratio, salaries, the percent of students in the states that are taking the exam. The statistics that are produced depend on whether the variables are coded as nominal or categorical or continuous. So for categorical data, I see the number of categories. So I've got 51 states, 8 years, and 8 regions. If I were missing data, I'd see a new column in here called N missing. In this case, we're not missing any data for any of the variables. For continuous data, we see the minimum, the maximum, mean, standard deviation. And because I selected Show Quartiles, we also see the medians through the interquartile range. So this is a good place to go to explore your data, to look at the range of values in your data set, to compare the mean to the median if you're interested in the shape of the distribution. It's also a good way to look at your data to see if your data need to be coded any differently. So for example, this data set includes latitude and longitude. And we can see that the data comes in with degree north, degree west. So the data are coded geographically. So how do we code our data? If we see that the data are miscoded, how do we change this? Well, with these two variables selected, I could either go back to the data table, or I could go to columns and then go to column information. And this is where I see the metadata for our variables. So I've got both of these variables selected. They're coded as numeric, and the modeling type, which is how JMP will treat them in an analysis, is continuous. We can also change the format. So we see in this case, these are coded as latitude. And if I go down to geographic, we can see the option that's selected. You can also code your data in a variety of different formats, and you can change the width it displays and the number of decimal places. Under column properties, you can specify notes or information regarding how the values display. So for example, if the data are entered as 0, 1, or pass-fail, and you want to be able to, instead of showing 0, 1, show labels, or order them pass or fail, depending on which one you want to appear first in an analysis, you can change properties under column properties. And a note on value ordering, JMP will plot alphanumeric data in order. So for example, if I've got data entered as small, medium, large, the medium, actually the large, will plot first. So value ordering can be used to plot the data in the order you'd like it to appear in a graph. But there are many other options available under the red triangle, or sorry, under column properties. So I'm going to click cancel here. And let's say that there are certain variables we're interested in looking at further. So for example, verbal, math, and region. There's a link to the distribution platform directly under summary statistics. In fact, if I click distribution, it'll launch the distribution platform. But let's see how to get there from scratch. I'm going to close this window, and I'll close the column viewer and go to Analyze, Distribution. And let me tuck away this in the background to clean up my screen a little bit. All right. So this is what we call a launch dialog. And our launch dialogs generally only ask for the variables that we're interested in looking at. So they ask for very, very few options. And the options that appear will depend on the type of variable we're looking at. So recall that this little blue triangle tells us we've got continuous data, and the red bar indicates that we've got categorical data or nominal data. If I select those variables and click Y columns, we can plot as many variables at a time as we'd like. A couple of options here that are nice if you're dealing with big data sets with lots and lots of variables and you're interested in only looking at the graphs, click histograms only. And if you're interested in only searching for certain variables to help you with a long list of variables, the red triangle next to the column selection, so the list of columns, allows you to search for certain types of variables or exclude certain formats from the search. So I'll click OK here. And I set a preference to ask for my output to turn sideways. So I'm asked for a horizontal layout that's also stacked. Again, under the red triangle, you can change the look and feel by asking for uniform scaling or stack, which converts it to horizontal. If you ask for a lot of different variables, you can arrange them in rows to make it a little bit easier to look at. And again, you have additional options under the red triangle. So for example, we can change the display of the histogram. In the color, we can add axes, we can ask for a normal quantile plot, and these are toggle switches. So if I ask for a normal quantile plot, we see the normal quantile plot, and again the points are color-coded from the data set. And if we want to turn that off, we simply select it again. Again, everything is linked to everything else. And if we're interested in additional statistics, by default we get the quantiles, and we also get summary statistics. There's a red triangle next to summary statistics that allows us to ask for additional statistics. So for example, I'll often turn on the number missing, or sometimes I look at robust measures if I know that I've got outliers. You can also change the alpha level for confidence interval or the trim mean percent. I'll simply hit cancel here. Now a little bit of information on all of our output. If you're looking for help on your output, there are two forms of help directly available. Recall that there's searchable help from the help menu. There's also what we call hover help. So for example, these two values here, these are the 95% confidence interval for the mean. If you have a statistic and you're interested in information regarding that particular statistic, if you take your mouse and hold your mouse on top of that statistic, or if you're on a Windows machine, if you hover around in a clockwise direction, you'll see a little box appear. And that little box is called hover help. And how fast it appears depends on how fast you have your mouse set. So here we give a definition of what we're looking at, and we generally give a little bit of help with interpretation. So this is the upper end of a 95% confidence interval. So anywhere you see a statistic and jump, hover your mouse in a clockwise direction, and you'll see a little box appear. A second form of help that's really nice from any window, in fact, I'll go ahead and make this plot above the histogram a little bit bigger so we can see it better, is the question mark. And again, if you're on a Windows machine, your menu hides automatically unless you change it in your preference, but you can also ask for it by hitting the Alt key on your keyboard, or the Option key. So I've got this plot, and this is a box plot, but let's say we're interested in additional information regarding this box plot. The question mark gives us direct access to our help. So if you click on the question mark and move your question mark over wherever you'd like additional information and click, this launches the interactive help. So we can see that this is an outlier box plot, and it gives us a definition of the components of the box plot. and then we can refine our search using the options on the side. So again, two forms of help directly within any platform: the hover help, simply hover on top of a statistic, and the question mark. Click on the question mark and drop the question mark wherever you're looking for additional information. So I'll make this a little smaller again. Now, I mentioned that you can plot many variables at a time, and keep in mind that JMP will update the type of analysis and graphs produced based on the type of data selected. So here I've got two continuous variables, and I've got a categorical variable. So categorical variables, by default, we see bar charts and frequency distribution. Again, all of the tables in JMP are interactive, so if we want to add additional information or sort by certain values, you can right-click directly in a table, and additional options are available in the red triangle. And for categorical data, different options are available than we see for continuous data. So for continuous data, we might want summary information, we might want to perform a hypothesis test, we might want to change the alpha level on a confidence interval, we might want to explore the distributional fit. For categorical data, there are fewer options available. So this is the distribution platform. And I'll omit the discussion of basic inference and hypothesis testing, and these topics will be covered in a future webinar. So far we've seen the columns viewer for looking at summary statistics, one variable at a time, distribution for looking at univariate graphs and statistics. Well, what if I want to be able to look at crosstabs? So I want to summarize more than one variable at a time. For this, I'll use Tabulate. So think of Tabulate as a drag and drop version of a pivot table in JMP. So we've got drop zones for columns. This is where we put the columns we'd like to analyze, and drop zones for rows. And the middle part under resulting cells is where we show the statistics that we've computed. So let's say, for example, we're interested in looking at math and verbal. So I'll select these, holding the control key to extend selection. And as I drag these towards the palette, notice that there's a blue rectangle or blue outline around the zones. And the blue outline indicates that if I release the variables, then JMP will be able to do something with the information in these variables. So I'll let go under drop zone for columns. And by default, JMP gives us the sum for SAT Verbal and SAT Math. Additional statistics are listed in the middle. So for example, I might be interested in the mean and the standard deviation. If I drag and drop these two statistics right in the results panel, it'll add these statistics in addition to the sum. Now to get rid of the sum, I could on a Mac just drag and move it away, and you see a little garbage symbol appear. I'll hit undo. You can also right click and hit delete. But I'm going to hit undo one more time. Another way that I can override sum is simply by dropping these two variables on top of the word sum. So this tells JMP to replace the sum with these two variables. Now the other drop zone is a tiny little box, and I can drag and drop other variables to this tiny little box. I've got a lot of decimal places here, so to remove some of those decimal places, I'll click Change Format. And there are a lot of different formats here. What I generally use is use the same decimal format and then fix decimal to indicate the number of decimal places to display. Now we can continue to add additional information to this. So for example, we can add another variable by dragging to the end of the table. Or we can break the data down further by dropping something in drop zone for rows. And notice if I let go of region, I already have region, let me add year. If I add year before region, this creates a hierarchy. So it's summarizing first by year and then by region. And if I drag year after region, this summarizes by region and then by year. Now a little bit on how to save our work. Let's say, for example, we want to be able to save the keystrokes to be able to regenerate this later. Recall that you can write code directly within JMP. Our code is called JSL. Again, you don't need to know how to write code to use JMP. But under the red triangle, in every analysis, there's an option Save Script, and we changed this a little bit in JMP 13, and there's an option to save it to the data table. So when I click Save Script to Data Table, it gives us the option to name the script, and we can also replace existing scripts if we've been saving these regularly. I'll click OK, and notice back in the data table there's a new option. So if I close this output and simply click on the green triangle or right click and select Run Script, it'll regenerate the analysis exactly as I had it. Now there's different ways of saving our work, and I'll talk about these as we're going along. For example, we might choose to pull this into a Word file or some other file. The third icon over on our toolbar, the fat plus sign, is our selection tool. So let's say I'm interested in everything grouped under the Tabulate gray outline bar. If I click on any section of JMP, notice that it highlights it, and now I can use the typical shortcuts in JMP like Edit, Copy, and go over to Word if I have Word open. In fact, I'll go ahead and reopen Word. Get a blank document. Now I can simply paste or Control V, and this paste in an editable format. And if I want to paste it as an object, I'll hit Undo. Then under the little drop down, there's an option Paste Special. And if you're on a Mac, the option to paste as an object is PDF. If you're on a Windows, it's Enhanced Metafile. And this will paste it as an object exactly as you saw it in JMP. So Control-C, Control-V, paste. Control-C, paste special, paste as an object. Okay, so a couple of ways of saving your work. While we're here, we can talk about a few other ways. Under File, let me see, I've got this selected, and I'll hit Control-C, and then under File, there's an option to export. And we can export in a number of different formats. So image, HTML, interactive HTML with data. So this will encrypt the data in the background and allow users to interact with your data. So you have to be a little bit careful with this one. You can also export your analysis as a Microsoft PowerPoint. If you're on a Windows machine, these options are under Edit, and it's called Save Selection As. And you'll see the same options, but you won't see this little window pop up. Right. So let's move on from Tabulate. So far we've seen the column viewer, we've seen distribution. If I know I want to look at one variable against another, and I know which variables I'm interested in looking at, I can also use fit y by x. So fit y by x lets me look at one variable against a second variable. And you have a key in the bottom corner that defines the type of analysis you'll get based on the variables that you select. So we'll kind of do this quickly. We won't spend a lot of time here again. There's another video or webinar coming up, data summary and analysis with JMP, and we'll go into this in much more detail in that webinar. But let's say, for example, I'm interested in looking at the relationship between SAT Math and region. So by default, this will take us to what we call the one-way platform, or we may be interested in looking at the relationship between math and verbal. And we'll assume that doing this analysis makes sense. If I click OK, for the relationship between math and region, we see a scatter plot with several options under the red triangle. And note that many of these are related to graphics, and many of them are related to performing inference, so hypothesis testing, equivalence testing, and you have a lot of different display options under the red triangle. For the bivariate fit for math versus verbal, we have a bivariate fit, and from here we can fit a line, fit a special, fit polynomial. Density ellipse is where we can ask for correlation. Okay. So that's fit y by x, but if we don't really know the type of analysis we're interested in looking at, or we're really in an exploratory mode, under Graph we'll use Graph Builder. And Graph Builder is a really versatile graphing platform for interacting with your data and exploring your data. So when we first got started, I simply dragged and dropped these variables into the middle of this palette. And this plotted math versus verbal with region as the overlay variable. And again, you can click and drag and move variables to these different zones. But let's go ahead and start over. So let's say I'm interested in math. And as I drag this near the palette, notice that the zones all highlight in blue. So everywhere you see a blue highlight, these are zones that we can release this variable. So this is what it looks like if we let go in Y, and I'm simply dragging without releasing. X, have frequency field if you've got summarized data, page if you want a different page or a different graph for every category of that variable, and here if it's continuous it'll automatically bin. Group Y bins, and group X also provides binning. There's overlay, color, size, so lots of different places to let go of variables. So if I let go of SAT math in the Y zone and let go of verbal in the X zone, by default we get a scatter plot. And for any graph type that appears, you'll see additional options on the side. So by default, we see the points, and there are additional options related to points here. So for example, this jitters is an option that can be turned on in certain graphs. And we also see a smoother. And a smoother has a little slider that allows us to change the bendiness of this smooth line that's been fit. Now, all the graph elements can be requested from this ribbon at the top of the graph. So for example, if I'm plotting a continuous versus a continuous variable, having a slider might make sense, or having a line of fit might make sense. And again, as you hold your mouse over any of these icons, you see additional options. So this is a line of fit, and from the line of fit, I can change the degree of the fit, so quadratic or cubic. I can also change what displays by default. So for example, I might use this before fitting a model to explore the type of model that might make sense. And we can add additional information to this graph. So for example, I've got a line of fit, but maybe I want the line of fit for each of the particular regions. So if I drag region to the overlay, it fits each one of these lines on top of one another, or I could color by region, or size the points by region, or wrap, or group in one direction or the other. So it's a really nice interactive graphing platform where you can look at your data in all sorts of different ways. I'll turn off some of these statistics here and set this back to linear. What else is available for continuous data? Well, we can ask for a density ellipse and ask to display the correlation. We can ask for contour. And some of these may or may not make sense. So for example, a bar chart is available, but it doesn't necessarily make sense. If I replace verbal with region, notice that there are different options available. In this case, a bar chart does make sense. But I can also ask for a box plot or histograms. And as we scroll through, we see some things that make sense and some things that might not make sense given the context. And again, for any one of the graph elements that we request, the axes are dynamic. So for example, if I want to change the axis for SAT Math, if I double click, I have a specification window where I can change the type of scale, change the format, the minimum and the maximum, the number of increments. I can change the way that the tick marks display. I can add reference lines. For categorical axis, you also have options. So for example, you may choose to change the labels that display or change the orientation of the labels. So lots of things that you can do directly from any axis. You can also click and change any label. So if you don't like the label, you can simply click on it and change it. When you have a graph that you decide is the finished product, there's a Done button here, and the Done button simply closes this control panel on the side. So let's say this is a graph that I'd like to make as my final graph. Again, you can change any text, or you can right-click and change the fonts, font colors, change axes around. You can also resize the graph dynamically, and there are additional options under the red triangle. So for example, we may not want to show the legend or a footer. We may want to include missing categories. So there are lots of options under the red triangle, and I'll ask for that control panel one more time. So I'm going to hit start over, and just briefly, this is one of the platforms in JMP where you can do geographic mapping. So if I drag state to this map shape zone, JMP ships with shape files, but you can also add your own. And what this is doing is telling JMP, go look through the shape files that ship with the product until you find Alabama and Alaska. And there are two files. There's one that has the names of the shapes, and there's a second one that has the XY boundaries. So JMP has found the shapefile for US states, and there are several that ship with the product. So I think there's counties, there's also world countries, and certain countries, there are territories within those countries that are also available. And again, you can easily add your own. And if I want to be able to color this by, for example, math scores, I can drag math to the color zone. And I've changed a preference so the color is different, but you can change colors as you go along. So for example, if we want to change the gradient or change the scale, you can easily do this. Now, a couple of little features for interacting with graphs, and again, this is a sort of an overview. We may want to take this graph or any analysis and see how the picture changes as I explore other variables. So there are a couple of nice features for doing this. On a Mac, you see there's two little icons, local data filter and column switcher. And these are also available on the red triangle under local data filter or column switchers under redo. So for example, I might want to plot several different variables on this. So I can swap out SAT Math with whatever variables I'm interested in. So if I click and drag and hold down the control key to extend the selection, we can select as many variables as we're interested in. And this allows us to update this picture based on other variables. So here I'm plotting math, verbal, percent taking. So if you've got a lot of different variables you want to explore, this is a really nice way to do this. And you can also do this from within any analysis within JMP. So I'll put it back on SAT Math and I'll remove the column switcher. And what if we want to try to dig into this and understand why this might be happening? The local data filter allows us to explore this picture, but based on values of other columns. So for example, I've got this variable percent taking. And I'll click Add. And this gives me a slider with the values that this variable takes on. So percent taking is a variable that represents the percentage of students in the state that take this exam. So in some states, only 5% of the students take it. In other states, 87% of the students take it. Now I can click and drag and change this. And notice how when we get to the upper end, certain states are selected and are displaying. And as I get down towards the lower end, we see the picture switches. So the local data filter, and you can build a really nice hierarchy here, can be used to explore a particular graph or display. There's also a global version of this. So I'm going to remove the local data filter. And if you want to interact with all of your output and every analysis is open, under rows there's an option called data filter. And this is what we call a global data filter. So this will impact all data tables, or it'll impact your data table and all open graphs or analyses. So for example, if I'm interested in looking at that same variable, and if I slide, notice it selects the observations corresponding to these values in the graph and also back in the data table. If I click the Show button, this is equivalent to asking JMP under under rows to hide values. So there's a hide option, there's an exclude option, and there's one that does both. So hiding tells JMP, don't let me see these points on any picture. And you can do this manually. There may be points that are distorting the graph or the analysis. If you don't want to see them on the graph, use hide. If you don't want them to be included in an analysis, use the exclude button. So the exclude button shows us this don't sign, and this tells JMP, don't put these points in any future calculation. So as I click and drag, I'm basically updating the picture by hiding and excluding observations in the data table. And my graph then will only display values that meet my criteria that I've set. So data filter is a global filter based on variables in your data set. The local data filter will only interact with the current graph. And hide and exclude give you a nice way to interact with data to remove observations from analyses or graphs that you may not be interested in looking at. So I'm going to go to clear row states to wipe that out. And we've covered most of the options I wanted to discuss under summarizing and graphing data. And we've talked a little bit about distribution. Distribution is both for univariate graphs, but also statistics and inference, so confidence intervals and hypothesis test. We saw a little bit of fit y by x, and remember that fit y by x gives you this little grid that tells you the type of analysis you'll get based on the variables you select. So from here we can ask for ANOVA or t-test, simple linear regression, logistic regression, or contingency table. And this is anytime we've got one x and one y. If you want to fit a model where you've got multiple x's or multiple y's, we use fit model. In fit model, if your response is continuous, by default you get standard least squares regression. If your response is categorical, you get logistic regression. From here, you can also fit mixed models, perform stepwise regression. You can easily visualize your model using what we call a prediction profiler, and you can also run simulations. So fit model, and I'll simply go to this quickly since we haven't seen it yet, has lots of options available under personality. And some of these are only available in JMP Pro. So for example, mixed models and generalized regression, which is a modern generalized linear modeling platform that also includes penalized methods. These are only available in JMP Pro. There is a standard version of a mixed model available in JMP, but this assumes that you've got a structured covariance matrix. So let me close this and a little bit more about basic analysis features, and again, just a high-level overview. We cover these in a future webinar. There are also a lot of multivariate procedures available. So under Analyze, you'll see multivariate methods, and in JMP 13 we restructured our menus slightly. So under multivariate, if you're interested in pairwise correlations, use the multivariate option, but you can also ask for principal components or discriminant. Several clustering features, and in JMP 13 we added latent class analysis, and cluster variables is also available, and you'll see that there are a number of other options available. Another new feature that we added in JMP 13 is this text explorer. So if you're dealing with unstructured text data, for example, like this survey data, if we ask for the text explorer, there's a new data type or modeling type for unstructured text. And here we can explore phrases and words, and there are lots of different options available for working with unstructured data. So for example, latent class analysis for clustering documents, and latent semantic analysis, which is similar to principal components. You can ask for a word cloud, but it's a really nice new platform in JMP 13. Right. So I wanted to talk a little bit about getting data into JMP. We've already talked a little bit about saving our work. So we mentioned how to copy and paste. I did mention how to save your scripts to a data table. You can save HTML and high-resolution graphics. You can also save to PowerPoint. Let's talk about getting data into JMP. So a common question is how much data can JMP handle? And the general rule of thumb is that you need twice the memory as your largest file size to be able to effectively deal with the data in JMP. So JMP is an in-memory program. Generally, if you have 1 or 2 gig as your maximum file size, if you've got twice that in terms of memory, JMP can generally handle it okay. If you want to create a new data table in JMP, use File, New Data Table. And by default, you get an empty data table with 1 column that's coded as continuous. If you want to change the name, simply click and type. I'll call this gender. If you want to add new columns, you can simply double-click in the space provided after the original column, or you can right-click and ask for new columns. If you know how many columns you want to add, so for example, let's say I know I need 3 columns. If I just double-click in the 3rd column, it'll add 3 columns. Let's call this one height, call this one weight. Now a little bit about our data in general. JMP is case sensitive. So for example, let's say I have a female, which is inner female, and if I use the down arrow, it creates that 1 row and gives me a new row. And if I enter a lowercase f now, JMP thinks I have 2 separate categories of female. Notice also that by accepting f, JMP has automatically changed the modeling type to categorical or nominal. So JMP is case sensitive, and remember that JMP analyses are based on the data type or the modeling type that we have. A little bit more about JMP. Let's say this person is 5 feet 8 inches tall. I wouldn't want to enter this person like this. So anytime JMP sees special symbols, JMP thinks that the data are text. So for something like height, instead we want to enter this person in decimal format, so say 68 inches instead. So any special symbol, you can add them to graphs, but your data needs to go in as pure numbers. There are features in JMP for cleaning up data like this. So for example, if I had a big data set and I know that I've got some issues with leading spaces or with capitalization under columns, there's a nice recode option that allows us to easily clean up data quality issues. Now we can also easily pull data in from any other format. So for example, if I've got data in Excel, and I thought I had Excel open here, let me go ahead and open up Excel again. So let's say I've got data in Excel, and I've got this data set called banking data. And notice the first row is my column header. If I click and drag, and I'll just select some of these and hit Control-C, that first row, JMP needs to recognize that first row as my column headers. So if I go back to JMP and I do File, New Data Table, this gives me a new blank data table. And I don't want to just paste the data in because JMP won't recognize the first row as column headers. So you have an option under Edit called Paste with Column Names. And this tells JMP to recognize that first row as the column names. And notice that JMP has correctly assigned the modeling type. So overdraft protection, yes. And the last three variables are all continuous. The first thing you want to do anytime you pull data into JMP is make sure that the correct modeling types are assigned. If JMP sees numbers, it's going to think it's continuous. If JMP sees text, it's going to think it's categorical. Now we can also pull data in directly. So for example, this banking example, this is just a link to some Excel data. As soon as I click on banking example, it gives me a sneak peek at what this spreadsheet looks like. So this spreadsheet actually has two sheets. I've got descriptions, and then I've also got the data. So by default, the display would look like this. So this particular example, my column headers are in row 3, and my data start in row 4. So you can use the options on the side to tell JMP where the data actually begins, and to make sure that the first row column header is actually reflected. So my column headers start on row 4, my data starts in row 5. You can also use this to concatenate spreadsheets and also restructure your data if it's in Excel. If I click Import, again JMP brings the data in, and it's known to put this first row as the column header. Now you can also open data in a variety of different forms. And I'll go to Windows for a second, and I think I'm just about out of time. If I want to open up a data set in JMP, and I'll just do this on the Windows side, if I hit File, Open, you'll see on the side under All JMP Files that JMP can open up a variety of different types of files. So for example, text files, we can easily read in text files, Excel files in different formats. We're integrated with SAS and R and MATLAB. You can also add in, read in SPSS files. So you can read in a variety of different types of files directly into JMP. If you're on the Windows side, there's also an Excel add-in. So if you're in Excel on the Windows side, you can use this add-in to push data directly from Excel over to JMP. So I'm just about out of time. We will post this journal and the recording in the webinar library, and this will appear in a day or so. And with this, I will go ahead and just summarize what we've done. We talked about basic navigation in JMP. We focused on tools for summarizing and graphing data. A short overview of tools for analyzing data. And remember that there will be another webinar specifically on data summary and analysis. We saw how to get data into JMP and save your work. And I talked about a few little tips and tricks as we were going along. And recall that all of our resources are posted at jmp.com/teach. So I will stop there and open this up for questions.